Federal Liberals rely on immigrants because immigrants are often reliable voters for Liberals. You know, I'm old enough to remember a time when the Bank of Canada cared about more than just real estate. Interest rates going low and starting that ballywick again
Yeah.
means that we are traveling down the path that led us here. I have maybe one subject, maybe one conversation a day with people who are unable to close. Well, I'll talk politics, and look, I'll throw my cards on the table. I'm a natural liberal. I am a liberal for one reason and one reason only. I've always said this the whole time, and that's the environment. I actually used to work for just as an aside, I used to work for the Conservative parties as a policy advisor. That's actually where I got my first job. There's
Okay.
an anti-environmental creed that runs through conservatism, which makes it unpalatable to me. But there is no way to examine the COVID and post-COVID years of the Liberal government and say that they handled the economy ably.
Right.
The original sin was the one I don't really blame them for because COVID was an unknown event,
Yeah.
and they quickly realized that they needed to stimulate the economy, and they generated an insane amount of monetary stimulus into the economy. They generated in 2 years, 25% of the dollars that were circulating in the economy were not present in the economy prior to 2019. That is an insane stimulus. The Serbs, and we're giving every person $60,000 of which they can keep 20. I mean,
Yeah.
it was nuts.
Yeah.
And the ramifications were known, but truthfully, they were looking at the downside, which is what happens if we have unemployment of an entire generation. Okay, it's worth the risk. Where the Liberals made their critical error was in not, once COVID was starting to abate, was in not immediately moving to a period of monetary constriction. Now, to be clear, I haven't been around the government tables. I don't know if I would have been saying this at the time, but in retrospect, it's very, very clear. And perhaps they should have known, given the amount of gas that they put on, that they were going to suffer an enormous problem from putting this much gas into the engine. And the Liberals did not pay attention to that for a long period of time. In fact, the Liberals went out of their way to be totally ineffectual with the ramifications and the effects of the policy. You want proof of that? Well, 2019 was COVID, 2020, 2021. It's now 2024. They have been aware of the housing crisis. They have made announcement after announcement and fund after fund. And yet their announcements are for like 1,000 properties here, or God knows what, while immigration numbers are beyond anything we've ever seen. So we don't have the infrastructure to support this. The federal government is at fault for, simply put, not stewarding the economy based on the amount of gas that was in the engine and what took place after COVID. Again, I don't blame them for what took place during COVID. I do blame them post. Polyev makes a very cogent and a very succinct argument that mismanagement has taken place. And that's an argument that you feel in your bones. There's no way that you could be a practicing professional, that you can be a student, that you could be someone in the middle class, that you could be someone who shops at Loblaws or No Frills or whatever. There is no way you can be that person and actually say that that argument is political gambling. Like, just there's no basis for it. No, it's clear there's a basis. What's more, the basic cyclical nature of politics, Canadians tire of their politicians after 3 elections. So it's very clear. And I don't think that there's any dispute on this. I think even the Liberals would agree. There is nothing that will save the Liberal Party come the next election. They are done. They are done like dinner. And what's more, that's not going to be for one election cycle. That's going to be for 2 or 3, because that's the Canadian way. We vote people in for 2 or 3 election cycles. Polyev will take it. The carbon tax will go. The immigration will be reviewed, although the Liberals are kind of on side with that now as well. They can't say it as plainly as the Conservatives because they're the ones who brought in the numbers. But political change is in the air. The real question in Ontario is what happens with Ford. Does he have one more in him? I mean, he's going to be facing I know this really isn't supposed to be a political
Yeah.
discussion, but
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Bonnie Crombie is a true challenger. He hasn't faced a true challenger. Last time's challenger was a guy who wore multicolored vests, and the only question people had is, what colored vest are you going to wear this time?
Okay.
Um, in Bonnie Crombie, he has a savvy political operator who
Mm,
has a built-in constituency in Mississauga, who is widely liked and admired,
mm,
who understands and comes at liberalism and the Liberal Party in what I think is the best way, which is a combination of social stewardship combined with economic sensibility. The classic traditional Trudeau, Martin Chrétien-esque sort of manner of holding on to power and making those alliances. And as a result, I think the much more interesting question, because it's obvious what's going to happen federally, is what's going to happen provincially.
mm.
And I do think that given the record of scandal in Ontario and given the formidable challenger, moreover, given the fact that all of the federal energies are going to translate into provincial opportunity because everyone's going to be skirting the federal ship and then moving on into Queen's Park. That's what happens. Usually there's a
Uh,
contravarying party.
okay.
I think the real interesting question is what happens in Ontario.
Now Bank of Canada said, okay, we're going to pause. We're going to stay on pause. And it looks like they're hinting they're not going to be raising. Do you think that's going to even boost it even more? And then we're going to get into a crazy market once again?
I'm old enough to remember a time when the Bank of Canada cared about more than just real estate,
Yeah.
when it cared about the cost of oil, when it cared about our manufacturing, imports, exports, everything else. I would pay good money to know around TIF's boardroom table
Mm,
exactly what percentage of the analysis that they're doing in determining where rates need to go now
right.
pertain to real estate. Because I think I mentioned to you in previous discussions we've had, I don't know if it's been on video,
Mm,
um, Canada has a real systemic problem insofar as everyone and their dog is pretty much 100% in on real estate.
yeah. Yeah.
And to that end, we are disproportionately susceptible to interest rates as interest rates affect residential housing. That's not a feature of our brethren to the States. That's a feature of where we are.
Mm,
So answering your question directly, strangely, there's almost an inverse effect, a necessary and inverse effect that now takes place, I believe, at the Bank of Canada. This is just purely conjecture, but it does seem this way, where when the market seemingly starts picking up some strength, the Bank of Canada intentionally tries to tamper down in direct relation to it. And whereas before, the fact that the real estate market was on a tear wouldn't necessarily indicate where the government Bank of Canada was going because there were other factors at play. Think
mm.
manufacturing, think oil, think whatever it is, exports. Now it seems like their prime focus, the eye of Sauron, if you will,
Yeah.
is distinctly focused on Toronto and Vancouver and
Yeah.
seeing what
Yeah.
happens in the housing markets.
Yeah.
And so, the fact that we didn't see the interest rates go down yesterday is probably a direct response to what you and I are feeling about the market, which is that there's a pickup. And the
Hmm.
government is probably sitting there saying, guys, don't think that the good times are coming back. We're monitoring this. And now smart money is calling for the rates to fall towards the third quarter of this year or the fourth quarter of this year. Probably again to let some of the wind out of the sails, which I believe still is a necessary correction. I don't believe that the corrective actions that we've partaken in over the past 2 years, however painful they are, has unwound even to well, certainly not to a large degree, but
Yeah.
I would hesitate to even say to a medium degree, the exuberance of the past many years, meaning that not only is there tremendous pain because we're slowly going down, but there's still tremendous pain for people who are trying to enter into the market who cannot. I mean, the average salary in order to buy $1 million home, which is the average cost of a freehold home in Toronto,
Yeah.
now requires $200,000 down and $250,000 in income. And good luck to you.
Yeah.
That assumes no student debt. That assumes nothing else. I mean,
Yeah.
what it assumes is that you have parental help. And should
Right.
we really be structuring an economy around people who require parental help to buy a first home? That's not the way Canada has found prosperity since World War II. And the Bank of Canada, I think, is rightly concerned and rightly turning its eye of sorrow on these markets, particularly because these are becoming such bars to basic middle class life and existence.
Yeah, I was going to ask that too, right? If like they say, okay, we're going to stay on pause, and then eventually they're going to, because some economists are even saying like as much as 1% drop by the end of the year. Will that mean that whatever we had in October, November, December, like that was the bottom? Like because it like so that would mean these prices are not affordable to the average per people, right? It's only for the rich, like you said, like 200 grand down payment, over $200,000 income, which means like a six figures each, even if it's two people. And a lot of people I know working in factories, they're nowhere close to that, right? That's my world. So that's where I come from. You're lucky to take home like 3, 4 grand a month, if you're lucky.
Yeah,
So,
totally. And
but
taking that home and saving up for a house while rental costs are
exactly,
2,500 to
yeah,
3,000. I mean,
yeah,
then you have to afford food,
yeah.
like, and then your previous debt. No, there's no way for an average person
There's,
to make it. There's no way for a person on $250,000 a year. I mean, I know the comments are going to go nuts and say, how can you say that 250,000? But consider this. I teach at law school,
mm,
and I'm watching a bunch of lawyers who, granted, are not average to begin with. These are not what the average is doing, but do consider that these were people who were gearing for the upper middle class for a long period of time.
yeah,
These people are now graduating with 120 to $130,000 worth of debt. 120 to 130,000 debt,
yeah,
and this is debt that they can't get rid of. They come out of that debt. They are now approaching 30 years old. They're expected to start a family.
hmm,
And then they go and they say, thank you very much. I would like to, while I am paying for rent and while I'm taking on a job that's paying me no better than $70,000 a year, $80,000 a year as a first-time lawyer. Again, I'm talking about lawyers here specifically. I'm not trying to talk about the general public. General
yeah,
public
yeah,
has a very different set of economic circumstance.
yeah,
But just consider, like, the people who have set themselves up and are ready to go ahead and go through a lot of pain in order to assure a middle class life, because that's
yeah,
kind of what the promise of the professions have been for the past 30 years.
yeah,
They're no longer finding it. They're no longer finding it in these things. And
right,
as a result, it's all well and good to believe that the market may have hit its nadir, but the simple fact is that we cannot have a housing stock that is designed around the rich alone and the renter class. That's not to say that some economies haven't been based on that in the past historically, but if we're to maintain ourselves as a first world country that provides opportunity to our immigrant base and that provides opportunity to our youth, we need to fundamentally address what is the necessary component of life, which is housing above
yeah,
all else. It's not any, it's just a matter of basic equity. You and I mean, I'm just basing it on the basis of your hair color and on the basis of the fact that I'm losing hair. You and
uh,
I had a very different experience when we came into this. Our
oh yeah,
parents, maybe not our parents, they were kind of the people who somewhat screwed it up as well, but previous generations had ensured that as long as we kind of stuck to the tried and true and worked, we were ahead. Now,
mm,
what we're seeing more and more is that those people who work, keep their head down, and do everything that's promised have absolutely no chance at viability. And then we wonder, why is it that Dubai is looking attractive with its 0% tax rate? Why is
right,
it that the States is starting to take on its more traditional role of being a brain drain, as opposed to, over the past 20 years, Canada has actually attracted a huge amount of brain and talent. Um, we're on the precipice of having that reversed. And this directly, of course, ties into the whole scandal with the colleges that are taking place these days. I don't know if you've been
yeah,
following them, but we
yeah,
we
a little bit,
have a problem. We have a significant problem, and interest rates going low and starting that ballywick again
yeah,
means that we are traveling down the path that led us here. And I don't know that the Bank of Canada wants to see that. And more, I don't know that our politicians from all parties, I don't know where the NDP is on anything, but I don't follow them.
Yes.
But both the liberals and the conservatives, I think, are kind of trending towards we have a problem here. Now, I grant you they have very different solutions, and I
Yeah.
grant you that, they may be totally ineffectual in dealing with them, but at least recognizing that these problems exist is something that I think is permeating the political consciousness as much as it is the Bank of Canada's consciousness. And as a result, there is a distinct desire to fix this problem. Now, again, governments are terrible, and I don't know if they will be able to fix this problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there is the desire, or a growing desire, at least.
You were talking about immigration. Like, what was the numbers were nuts, but nobody could say anything because then you're like, oh, you're anti-immigration. I believe I can say something, being an immigrant. Like, what was the reasoning behind like such huge numbers for immigration? Like the real reasoning, not like, oh, we need workers, we have aging population. Like, what was like, what happened all of a sudden? And they didn't think that, hey, we don't have places to put a lot of these people. We don't have hospital. Like, what happened?
Well, first of all, you don't need to be anti-immigrant to understand that huge amounts of immigration, in the absence of infrastructure to support them,
Mhm.
is a problem. I mean, that's
Right.
just an obvious thing, right?
Right.
And by the way, history suggests that countries that properly care for their immigrants and that have the ability to properly absorb them are the ones where there's the greatest social cohesion. Immigration itself is not a problem. Even 1 million immigrants a year, no problem.
Yeah.
I mean, Canada is a country of immigrants. No one that I encounter on a daily basis is sitting there saying, "Oh, all the immigrants out there, all the brown people."
Yeah.
No one is saying that at all.
No one. No.
Have
Yeah.
the problem that immigration and the attitudes towards immigration have turned on a dime.
Mm.
And what is happening is not that people are becoming less willing to accommodate immigration. What's happening is that people have a large scale recognition that we are taking people in without the ability and without the plan to care for them, which is
Right.
doing a disservice both to the immigrants and to Canadians generally.
Right.
And they are saying to the government very plainly, we do not mind immigrants. Bring in whoever you want in any numbers you want. I really truly believe the Canadians are not going to have a problem with that. We
Mhm.
haven't historically. But if you do, you sure as heck better have a plan for them. So what's happening? Well, what's happening, I think, if you ask me, and remember, immigration is not my bailiwick. I'm not an immigration lawyer. I am now about to say something that is totally based on my personal belief. Your personal belief or any of the listeners' personal beliefs are just as valid. No, you can agree or you can disagree.
Mhm.
But my personal take is that the party that's in power, the Liberals, combined with the parties that are in power provincially, had a vested interest in seeing numbers skyrocket and have never seen a repercussion to that effect. I'll
Mhm.
give you an example of what I mean. Federal Liberals rely on immigrants because immigrants are often reliable voters for Liberals. And what's more, we only seem to get strengthened when we let them in. There has been no experience in Canadian history where immigration has actually netted a bad political result for the Liberal Party. What's more, it has contributed to large scale strength, diversity, and for all of those reasons, I don't think the Liberals even had this on their radar. You tell them that there's an extra 100,000 people coming in. Okay, fine. Like it's not even something that's ingrained politically to
Okay.
be an issue that you're considering. So it can kind of happen while you're sleeping. But
Okay.
the bigger issue is that provincial budgets being squeezed, provinces discovered a brand new source of ability to fund their higher universities and educational facilities in the form of immigration by massively increasing tuition fees for immigrants. And immigrants, in turn, were all too willing to pay that because schooling was one way into getting a Canadian passport.
Mhm.
And so, particularly in South Asia, and particularly in India, Pakistan, and some of the other places, there were a massive amounts, there was a disjoined interest that took place. There was an interest in having the students come into Canada, and for Canadian universities or colleges, particularly, not the research universities, but colleges to accept them, because that would then fund those colleges and allow for provincial budgets to stay steady so that healthcare can be funded and everything else.
Mm.
All of that is true. But where the disjoinder of interest took place was that the colleges were doing it purely in order to sustain their budgets and keep their like take a look at what happened with Laurentian University. Laurentian University went bankrupt or went near bankrupt, and they did not accept foreign students. They're one of the few universities that did not rely on foreign money, and they just kept their provincial funding formula at the same level, and as a result they couldn't sustain themselves. So colleges got the benefit of that.
Mm-hmm.
And the Faustian bargain was, we will the Indian students and the Pakistani students and all of the other students that were coming over said, we'll pay whatever it is. You just go ahead and you get us our citizenship. There
Right.
was a recent well, this is really becoming a political sort of thing. This isn't so much real estate, but anyways,
I'm trying to
there
keep
was a
up here.
yeah, there was a recent I don't know if you were watching Algoma University, but Algoma University just had 24-hour protests from their students because their professor chose to fail the entire class except for one person,
Really?
twice. And
Wow.
as a result, all the students went on strike. And if you saw it, it was pathetic. They all went on strike with signs that were like misspelled and God knows what, saying like, we demand this. And when asked, the students said, we paid our money. We want our grades.
Mm.
Nowhere in, and at no point did any of them talk about the quality of their product or that they successfully created academic virtue sufficient to pass the course. Instead, what they were saying, what they were trying to get at, and what they were saying in their own languages, if you had it translated, was, we came here on a deal. The deal was that we would pay you exorbitant sums that our families have saved up, and you'll get us citizenship, and you're not
Mm.
going to flunk us from these universities. And you
Wow.
broke that deal because a professor with a backbone stood up and said, this is ridiculous. I'm
Right.
not graduating you. There
Wow.
is some, and so the Algoma University protest that took place is fascinating. And in fact, probably functionally forced the government's hand into the announcement that you saw this week, where they basically are saying, we're cutting back
Yeah.
immigration and student acceptance into these colleges, particularly because everyone's just so embarrassed by the entirety of the event. So we have this problem where, just to sum up, the Liberals, which have been traditionally an immigration-friendly party and have not really had their eyes open to any of the downsides, because there never have been any downsides really for Canadians, are suddenly facing a reality that the Conservatives are well aware of, which is that, oh God, there is no facilities to support them, and they're coming in under nefarious purposes in order to avail themselves of an immigration system that hasn't been fine-tuned. The
Right.
province, in turn, is going to suffer financially because because a lot of our institutions now rely on that money going forward. And really, we're on the precipice of change across the immigration and education sectors as a result.
All right, there is no easy segue into this, but I'm gonna get to some YouTube questions because a lot of people are fans of yours. So I told them Mark's gonna be around. Do you guys have any questions? So first question is, how is the pre-construction market since we last spoke? I think we spoke last in August, and are like deals falling through, and also any builders like going bankrupt and stuff like, is that still happening? Has it gotten worse or better since we spoke?
All right, so pre-con is divided into two things: pre-con sales and pre-con closings.
Mhm.
Your question was about pre-con closings. Do you want me to address both?
Yeah, yeah.
So pre-con
Closings
sales.
because
Oh, well, let me start with pre-con sales, just
sure,
because it's
sure.
easier. Pre-con sales, um, builders are canceling projects left, right, and center. You don't hear about them because they just don't come to the fore, but a whole lot of building projects have been shelved, and very few people have the guts to go out to market at the present time. And those pre-con sales that are working are those that have very long closing dates and long deposit schedules, though we are starting to see a couple of major builders that have to keep going because they have some costs, like Mattamy Homes and the like,
Right.
starting to sell on the reg. But any normalcy that takes place in the sales cycle presently in the new build is happening specifically because the supply is so curtailed. So that is to say the demand has massively dropped, but so has the supply, and thus it appears a bit more even than perhaps it would be. If we had the same supply that we had 2 years ago, it would just be utter devastation. It's just that the builders themselves are pulling back, realizing that no, this isn't the time, and we don't have the demand. So the supply is somewhat working itself out because builders are just not coming to market with new product, which is
Right.
then meeting the massively reduced demand. There you go. Of
Right.
course, that wasn't your question at all, but I did enjoy the sound of my own voice in answering.
That's
Um, so let's turn to your question, which is what's happening on closing. Yes, closings are increasingly terrible, and they will get increasingly terrible with time. Look, remember, the condo cycle is a 5-year cycle. I think I said this last I was on your show. The condo cycle is a 5-year cycle. That 5-year cycle means that we are still closing properties that were purchased in 2020, 2021 at the height of market. What's more, those people who purchased were always expecting to be able to assign or exit their product, and many of them had no ability to afford the product in any event, and had just seen Uncle Bob make a lot of money. We are continually dealing. I have maybe one subject, maybe one conversation a day with people who are unable to close. And the job of a lawyer of late has been taking people through the concept of breach. Remember, breach is not illegal. You're allowed to breach a contract. You're not allowed to go 101 kilometers down a highway. That's illegal. There's a statute that says you have to go 100, but there's nothing that says you must complete a contract. There's just consequences that flow. And as a result, the job of a lawyer is really sitting there saying, look, here's what it looks like if you breach the contract, and based on what we expect you'll be able to resell for, here's what the quantity of damage is, versus here is what it will cost to go forward, take a private mortgage and sell within 6 months with all the attenuating realtor fees, land transfer tax, adjustment costs, and everything else. And we help clients every single day now decide whether to breach or not. And more often than not, the decision is usually to breach. It usually financially makes sense
really
to breach,
wow.
even with the attenuating costs. Now, there is something to breaching, which is that there's untold risk, because who knows what they're going to resell for. The builder has an obligation to resell for their highest price, but who knows what that's going to be. So those people who are choosing to breach have to have some appetite for risk, because it is an unknown, but it is an unknown where you have a pretty good guess as to how that's going to play out versus the alternative, which is closing. And as a result, builders are experiencing what I think is not, at this point, statistically insignificant losses on a per project basis. I think the vast majority of their units are still closing. 96, 97% are like, I don't have these stats. I'm making these stats up. Please don't think that these stats are real. Like, I'm not Jordan. Jordan would be able to tell you exactly what these stats are, and I'm just giving you my gut feel.
Yeah.
But 96, 97% still closing, no problem. But the amount of non-closures that are taking place, as indicative in my office where I have to write to someone and say, we're not closing this, way up. Now,
Wow.
it's up from 0, or it's up from 0.1%. So when I say
Yeah.
like quadruple, like that shouldn't scare the heck out of you, because you're starting from a very low base number.
Sure.
But it's growing. It's more and more significant. It is a feature that people are watching with worry. And you can probably yourself get a sense of where you are by simply visiting the assignment markets of Facebook, and seeing exactly how many people have these things for sale, and how many of them say huge fire sale, willing to walk away from deposits. And
Right.
that
Oh,
is
yeah.
a good number of them.
Yeah. Another question from YouTube is, a lot of renewals are supposed to come up where a lot of them will not be able to renew at the high rates. Do you see that kind of like softening the market a bit if you see a flood of listings come, or will they just be able to adapt and nothing changes?
I can't speak to what people are doing, but I can speak to the fact that I have not had many people who, based on the higher rates, have found themselves in a position where they have to fire sale, where they have to sell
Okay.
off their product.
Okay.
I've seen that in the new build space. But remember, the vast majority of people have had their houses for more than 2, 3, 4 years, and they've usually built up some equity in them. The banks are ready to accommodate. Usually they were with first lenders. They can move to a second if it's a problem. I'm not seeing that as a huge, I mean, obviously there's huge problems. More and more of our earnings are going into real estate because of higher interest rates, leaving less and less for the real economy. All of this is true, but if you're asking, has it reached its nadir? Has it reached the point where people are visiting trustees and defaults and everything else? Yes, to a degree, but nothing significant
Nothing.
nothing significant where I'm sitting there saying, oh my God, like jump out the window, cars on
Oh,
fire.
okay. So it's not like a huge tsunami of listings going to come and then flood the market and then prices come down.
No, although power of sales are way up. Power
Right.
of sales are way up. Again, statistically, from nothing, they're way up.
Yeah.
Um, but 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 they're becoming more and more frequent. And quite frankly, power of sales should be part of a market. We haven't had power of sales as part of a market for 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe we're reverting back to norm. We'll probably go a bit more than norm
Okay.
as we kind of revert back to where we should be. And there's definitely power sales out there, and there's definitely value add and negotiation abilities with lenders, which is something we haven't seen in the power sale market for a long time too. But I mean, this is not anyone who sits there and says the house is on fire, everyone is power selling, isn't part of the market. That's not what's happening presently.
Okay. Um, I've got about 6 minutes, 40 seconds left because I'm too cheap to buy the upgraded version. Some people want to know, should they buy now or wait longer? And what do you think like the long-term solution is? Like if supply is the solution, like how can builder build more homes if the costs are too high? So and then I'll just kind of let you take it away and then you've got 6 minutes, 18 seconds.
Well, you've given me a really crappy question
Oh,
because we're about to hit the spring market and the thing is about to cycle up. And if everyone's watching this in the next 2 weeks or so, everyone's going to be in the middle of a heated market. And if
yeah.
I sit there and say, hey, I actually don't think that things are going to move too much in the pricing angle, they might even continue their downward trend. They're going to say, wow, Mark was really off because over the past, 2, 3 weeks, all I've heard about are bidding wars of and
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
extremists and everything else.
yeah, so
But
forget that one.
no. But the truth is, those bidding wars are not the same bidding wars that they were in 2021.
Okay, yeah,
They're
for
bidding
sure.
wars where people are bidding under and looking for value and everything else. I don't know that the average, as we talked about at the beginning, I don't know that the average Canadian can afford present prices. And as a result, if you believe that, and if you believe that the average Canadian is what moves the market, I don't know that I would be too worried that real estate is going to go on a tear again. It may
Okay.
plateau, it may even go up. But
Hmm.
when we say it's going to go up, very gradual, much more acclimatized to historical norm. And so I would tell people there is still a significant risk of downturn. There is a very light risk of huge incline,
Okay.
and make your decision within that context.
Okay. Yeah, like what's the long-term solution? Supply?
Well, the long-term solution is clearly supply.
Hmm.
The long term, we're in a bind. We just haven't built enough. We have too many people for too few product, and we spend too much on housing. We're in a bigger bind than just housing because so much of our attention, time and attention that goes into housing should be going into the real economy, should be going to build businesses, should be going to, establishing restaurants and to building up tech. And instead, 100% of our money goes into real estate. Not 100%, but so much of our money just goes into real estate because of the price. So we're in a real bind. I don't know how we unwind it. I do know that higher interest rates were part of that solution. Frankly, I said something unpopular on Twitter today. I'll say it here. I would prefer to see higher interest rates for longer. I understand the hardship that that creates. I'm not trying to minimize it, but the hardship that is created for our youth, for people who are starting, for people who have never been given a chance over the past 20 years has been so extreme that we either start caring about our future generations or we do not. And
Mm.
our pain today comes at their gain. And another way of looking at this is not just saying, oh God, how do I survive? But also, how do my kids survive? We all have kids, and we all have to make sure that they can provide for their futures. And we should also be thinking about that as part of the equation. So, my hope is that we can sustain higher interest rates for longer so that we can see a gradual decline happening. By the way, it has been a gradual decline over the course of a couple of years. I
Yeah.
know it feels like much more, but in aggregate, certain areas have had a huge decline. Like if you bought in Caledon, you're going to probably write in the comments, oh my God, what is he talking about? But on average, it's been a gradual decline. I think a gradual decline is healthy. And if we can keep on engineering that, I think we'll all be better off long term. Short term, that will cause enormous pain, enormous hardship. And perhaps the way through, the easiest way through, is to try to gear for a plateaued real estate market that doesn't go up or down and allow inflation itself to account for the step up that gives young people the ability to walk into the market. That's probably the softest landing that we could have. That's what I would hope for. As to what happens, no one ever asks me. The Bank of Canada does not call me and ask me what they think they should do. I wish they would.
Yeah.
That's about all I can really say about that.
Well, I think this one again is going to be the most important video of the year. The last one we had was easily the most important. Not the views, but the content itself. So I think this one again is going to be very important, especially people who are into politics. I think that was a good conversation.
Yeah, you'll forgive
Yeah.
me. I didn't mean to go as political as I did. I try to
No,
stay
no,
away from it, but
no,
you
it's
know,
fine. It's fine. Yeah.
sometimes it's okay. Sometimes you can talk politics. What can I
Yeah.
tell you?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, can I say one last part about politics? Because we have
Yep.
a minute 30 left.
1 minute 30. Yeah.
I really wish my wish for people politically is that we listened to one another better.
Exactly.
Conservatives, liberals. I wish you wouldn't ban people who you disagree with. I
Exactly.
haven't banned anyone ever on social media, and I have a large social media following. I've never banned anyone, and intentionally so. I really believe that we are losing a fundamental skill to dialogue with one another and to understand that there are principal points that each side makes that have merit. I wish that we had a more structured and nuanced dialogue. That's my wish for politics. That's my wish for really all aspects of our economy as well.
I think that's a good way to end it there. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Vic.
Thanks as always. I'll see you next
My
time.
best.
Thank
Take
you.
care.